Hello everybody. This week, as it's October and it's a really misty, foggy day here today, so I thought we'd have a go at painting a crow, a spooky crow on a branch. I see lots of crows around here, and the crow that I have that I'm going to be painting today is one that I saw sitting on a rock near me a few weeks ago. So I have a reference photo of it, which is actually a painting that I already did of it on an old tree. And I think that is actually in one of my previous videos. If you want to go back and have a look, I'll link one below. So we're going to start off with some Alder ink, which is ink that I made using those tiny little alder cones. Alder tree is a tree that has these tiny little cones, almost like pine cones, but they're really small. And if you boil those pine cones, you can obtain an ink from them. Now this Alder ink also has a little bit of iron solution, which I created just by soaking some rusty nails in some water and vinegar. And adding the iron solution just made the ink a little bit darker. It didn't go black like I was hoping, but it went darker. So I'm splashing some of this ink onto a wet paper just to get a kind of moody sky background. I'm using this dark brown ink because sometimes the moody skies have a kind of a muddy kind of tinge, and for this particular piece I thought it would work quite well. So I'm just smushing some of the ink about until I get the effect that I want. Made the paper quite wet in places, so it is pooling. So I think what I'm going to do is just get a tissue and blot some of the excess water in places. It will also help give it a little bit more pattern, a little bit more of a cloud effect as well, which would be quite cool, I think. I'm just going to finish off adding a little bit more ink about. So the blotting worked quite well, so I'm just going to start adding a few splashes and just darkening some of the colour where I want it, just to get some layers really. And this is just a simple little sketch in my sketchbook, just for fun, so you can have a go, and it's just practice, just art practice. It's quite nice for a warm-up, a quick warm-up before you start working on a painting that's more detailed, or just to get a nice loose effect as well. So now we're going to start painting a branch. What I did is I dried the ink first with a hairdryer, just because I didn't have time to wait for it to dry, and hairdryers dry the paper quite quickly. You can also do that with watercolour. So I'm just painting in a branch. So the branches obviously start out thicker and then become tapered and narrower towards the end. And I'm making this one quite twisty. And I'm going to add some little branches. I'm going to have the crow sat roughly in the middle of the branch. I'm using my handmade watercolours. This black is soot from my chimney mixed with the gum arabic solution, and I have videos for that, how I mix up watercolours and how I make paint on my account. I'll also link those below. So we're just drawing in some smaller branches, and again you just want to taper off the ends. Draw as many as you like. Trees can be really interesting with branches, and they can all go in different directions when you actually start painting from life, from real trees. But this one is just imaginary, so some branches are actually just really simple as well. Sorry, my voice sounds a bit croaky. I did have a cold last week, and I think my voice is still not quite right. I can hear on the recording that it just sounds a little bit croaky, but I'm fine. The cold is not quite gone, but almost gone. But I definitely feel a lot better than I did a week ago, that's for sure. So I'm just carrying on adding the branches. And what I'm going to do is just add some darker tones in some areas. I'm not going to do too much detail. And then later on, we'll just add some little light splashes to where the light's hitting. And you can just decide when you're painting something like this, which direction you want the light to come from. I've got some gaps in the clouds there. So the light could be coming from behind there, but I'm going to have it coming from underneath, and that is just a gap in the clouds against the dark sky. So I'm going to start drawing in the crow using my reference photo. Now this crow was actually cawing when I took the picture, so it's got its mouth open. And I'm just sketching it out with my watercolour. If you wanted to, you could sketch it out before you started painting with a pencil and then just work around your pencil drawing, or you could block it out using some masking fluid if you wanted to, if you're going to do a detailed drawing. But this one, I know that this black watercolour will paint perfectly fine over this ink, and I've only used the one colour of ink, so it should be fine. So I'm just sketching it out. Obviously, if you're not that confident drawing in a crow, just have a go with pencil before you start adding the ink, and then you can rub it out if you make a mistake. Obviously, it's harder to rub this out. If I make a mistake, I can't rub it out. I'd have to try and re-wet it. But I've drawn this crow before, so I'm pretty sure that I can sketch him out in the watercolour. So I'm just going for it. So we'll just have to see what happens. Now also, I'm not going to be letting this dry in between. I'm just going to be using wet on wet technique. And I'm going to leave some gaps in the black for the light, and where the light hits the crow and shines on his wings. Because although he's very, very black, this crow, he does have some little slight bit of sheen on his wings. It's not white, it's just a sheen. And it doesn't really seem to matter where the light was coming from, which direction. It was as he moved, as he cawed, the sheen just kind of moved across his feathers. Beautiful birds, really. So I'm just going to add some sheen by leaving gaps and then adding the lighter colour, watercolour, a bit later. Take your time and enjoy the process. You can always start again if it's in your sketchbook, if you feel it goes wrong, or change it into something else. Sometimes you might want to have a go at just painting the crow first and then adding in the branch in the background. It's up to you. You know, try all three things, see which one works for you if you feel you need the practice. But sometimes it's good to just have a go at doing the whole thing. So I'm just adding a couple more little branches here now, just whilst some of that black dries just a little bit. I'm going to probably add a few more branches here and there before we finish the piece. I'm going to add a few little splashes because I have to have splashes, you know me. I like a good splash on there. So now I'm going in with the lighter colour, watercolour, which is a paint that I made using some pieces of brick, found brick. Now these weren't red brick, this was a lighter colour brick, almost kind of a pinky colour brick. And it makes this pale, kind of dusky pink colour, which I thought might be quite good. And then what I'll do is just darken the black areas around it where I want it. I'm just fixing his tail a little bit because it does seem to curve around in the photo, but I think when I took the picture he was sitting on a rock, so I think it was probably the rock that was curving his tail up. So I just have to imagine that this branch is curving his tail up. So I'm just filling in with some more black. Now I'm not actually going to paint an eye on this crow because I couldn't see his eyes at all. He's got black eyes against black feathers, but I'm just going to add a tiny little bit of white just to add a touch of light where I think his eye would be, but not like enough so that it looks like he's got a big white eye. So I'm just going to work on some more branches here. Just kind of using the flick technique, drag and flick, just to get a nice little fine end. And I'm just wiggling the brush to get some nice wiggly branches. And I'm probably going to add a few thick bits in certain areas, because sometimes when you look at a tree you get like a thick bit in the middle of a branch where the branch divides or bifurcates. Sometimes branches are kind of twisted on each other, so there's no real wrong thing you can do when you're drawing a tree. A few more splashes to add, as long as the branches look like branches, really, you can't go wrong. So now I'm going back in with the light, just to add some, just to start adding some of the lighter tones onto the branch where I've chosen the light direction to come in from. You can see I've just left some gaps in the crow, which I'll go over a little bit just to blend them out a bit more, just so they look like sheen and shimmer rather than actual white light. It just helps give the crow a little bit more dimension. I might just fix his tail a little bit more as well. Now in this palette I have some white, which is actually my white gesso, my natural gesso, and I find that it works really well for highlighting because it is so white. Because the limestone natural paint that I have is more of a creamy white, and it's pretty good for highlighting, but it's not ever so white, so sometimes I'll use a little bit of this one as well. I find the creamy one works really well on certain paintings, but not so well on others. I don't know why. But so I'm just now adding just a few little white points where the light is hitting the branches underneath. Not all along, just in certain areas, just to give the whole piece a little bit more dimension. And then we're about done. I might just add a little bit more depth to the crow and probably a few more splashes. Splashes just make things look cool. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah, so just going back in with the black, and I'm just going to darken off, because the watercolour will have dried a little bit more, so I'm just darkening off some of the areas where I can see he's blacker than other areas, because there are certain tones. And I'll just give him a little bit more shape. It might be a her, I don't know. I don't know how you tell with crows. There was two of them, so I think they were talking to each other, but one was sat on the rock near me and the other one had flown off into the trees. So I'm just fixing his tail a little bit. And then we're about done. I'm just going to add a little white bit to his eye. Just fixing the shape, just giving him, he has like a few little tufty bits of feathers sticking out, because obviously when he's cawing his feathers are lifting. So I'm just adding a little tiny little dab of white to his eye. You probably won't even see it on the camera, but in the picture you'll just see a slight little glisten. A few more splashes and a few more branches, and then we're done. So thanks for watching.